right, let's get started. Thank you for joining, everyone, and welcome to our first ever office hours for Agile Requirements Designer. As you may have noticed, we're doing things a bit differently today. Typically, when we do the community office hours, it's a chat-only session, but today we're actually offering the opportunity to ask questions over the phone line to the product experts. So you can go ahead. Everyone is muted on default, so if you have a verbal question you'd like to ask, you can press #6 on your telephone keypad to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we also have the chat box open if you'd like to ask a question over the chat box. So we can go ahead and get started. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, we will stay in the background, wait for you guys, and I think that Ben also has a few key features about the product that he'd like to share. So we'll give it a few minutes.
Don't know if I'd call them keys.
So we'll give it a few minutes. If you guys have questions, please feel free to chime in.
Melanie, can you make me presenter? I just want to go over one very, very short promotional item.
Sure.
Great.
There you go.
Okay. So if you guys can see my screen now, just a real quick thing before we start. I've been asked by marketing to let you know that these newsletters, if you when you open Agile Designer now and you get your welcome page, you can actually sign up for either major release newsletters or just regular update newsletters. These are pretty cool because, you know, the product's changing all of the time, and the best way to keep on top of them is really just, you know, get an email whenever something changes, and essentially that's what these are. So you can either sign up for kind of just learning about the GA releases, and you can kind of sign up for slightly more regular emails if you want to know the very latest stuff that's going in. So if you just click these links, it will take you to somewhere where you can sign up for those. Just a quick public service announcement before we get started.
Awesome, thank you. And I will let you keep the ball just in case there's anything else that we need to go over.
Cool.
All right, guys, don't be shy. You have your product experts here, and they are completely at your disposal to answer any of your questions. So this is a rare opportunity. Go ahead and ask any questions you have. If you want to ask a verbal question, once again, just click #6 on your telephone keypad to unmute yourself. Or I think you can also press the little mute icon within WebEx. But you also have the option to ask any questions you have over chat. There's a chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of the WebEx screen, and you can type any questions you have there. Okay, we have the first question in from Dan Sweeney. He says, saw the JIRA two-way integration and just saw the TFS notice on the home page you showed. What level of TFS integration is there now?
So right now it's a prototype being developed, so that's not actually out there yet. That is coming out in the next couple of GAs. So I think the idea probably about 2 GAs from now is to, you know, have a good working integration that presumably goes 2 ways to TFS. So in answer to your question, right now it's a prototype, so there's nothing in the public GA, but that will be changing across probably 2 GAs time from now. Thanks for the question, though. I think a lot of people are quite interested in TFS coming up. I mean, we're largely covering our bases, you know, with Rally, JIRA, ALM, etc., and I think TFS was the one that's really missing. So I think a lot of people have been interested in that. So thanks for the question.
So just to let you guys know, recently on the Agile Requirements Designer community, we had quite a few technical videos posted by Tom Price, the most recent of which is how to use the Git interface in CI Agile Requirements Designer. So if you guys are interested in getting small little snippets on some of the key stuff you can do within ARD, come to the community, click on content, and then click on videos, and you can see some of those that were posted. We also had a really fun document posted by the product owner, Hugh Price, a few days ago on how to download flows for Pokemon Go. And I really liked that. I thought that was a lot of fun because I've had my head buried in my phone playing Pokemon Go recently. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. It is on the featured content section of the ARD community homepage. Any other questions, guys? Now is the time to ask. We have Ben on, and we also have Taylor Gill on, and they are both here to answer your questions, and they're able to show you any answers you have in the product. So, okay. Jan wants me to send the link. Yes, I will send the link to both of those items that I just promoted in just a second. We also had a question in from Tracy Ma. Import process flowchart from Visio, which is the right way that no need manually adjust again by myself in ARD?
Okay, so there's a couple things on this. Let me just get my screen up. Okay, so with regards to Visio, we have actually improved the Visio importer very recently. So in the next GA, that should be available. So what we didn't do before is we didn't actually consider the layout data of the blocks coming in. We merely parsed them and laid them out ourselves. So now we actually will inherit the layout of what you import. Vis-a-vis manual fixing, there's still a couple of issues. So the importer only understands the most recent .vsdx format, right? So it has to be .vsdx, that's number one. If it's .vsd, there are tools like Bizarre Modeler which will happily convert it for you. Visio might be able to do that as well. So that there are open source tools which will happily, convert .vsds into something that's more, it's slightly easier to import into Agile Designer like BPMN2 or XPDL or VSDX. The second requirement is that you're using dynamic connectors. So there are certain things that you can build inside Visio that have no analog inside Agile Designer. And conversely, there are things inside Agile Designer which have no analog inside Visio. So if you build your connectors inside Visios and your connections between your blocks with things which aren't real connectors, they're just arrows which, are roughly in the right place that they could be connected to the human eye, we're not going to be able to parse that and know that they're connected. So if you use dynamic connectors, you have the advantage that, we can very easily bring that in. So, if I just open a new flow, hopefully I have a Visio to bring in somewhere. Do I have one? I'm not sure I actually have one to hand. No, I don't. Never mind. But if you actually try out the Visio in the next release, it's much, much more capable. I would say it doesn't really make any mistakes on the layout or the names or the connections. The things which might happen if you're not careful are in old Visio flows which you aren't the author of. Problems we see quite often are, why is Agile Designer brought in this block? Well, that block was underneath another block inside your flow. So inside your Visio, any block that's there is going to get imported. So if you have invisible blocks or blocks which are on top of each other, or lines which are on top of each other, we're going to, because we just read the source, we're going to bring all of that in, even if, they would have been deleted in the past, but, they were just hidden or whatever it was. That's not going to translate into ARD. So in answer to your question, the best way to do it with minimized manual fixing is use .vsdx, use dynamic connectors, and the more things you have on there which are kind of unusual to ARD, like additional text and stuff like that, which doesn't really map into blocks, that's not going to help either. But what you will find in the next GA that you get will be a vast improvement, actually, in terms of the fidelity of the import, particularly as it pertains to the accuracy of the layout, which is basically now by default just matches the actual coordinate layout that you had in your original Visio. One last thing to talk about is there are things which, again, don't have an analog in ARD. For example, concurrency. So if you have arrows which split inside your Visio, ARD is going to understand that as a decision because we don't have the concept of concurrency. In our world, if you want to map concurrent things, you typically model them one after the other, because unless you have complicated thread operations where two threads are actually constantly interacting, most things which happen concurrently, it's irrelevant whether they're concurrent or actually just one after the other. So that's going to be treated as a decision. So that is still going to require some manual fixing for the meantime. We are thinking about something for that, but I think you'll see vast improvements in the most recent version that's going to come out. Okay.
Okay, Tracy has a follow-up. Could you show me what I should do next to generate test cases after the process flow is ready?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we open something from examples, just go to my examples folder. Once we have finally fixed our, so we go to, let's go to song streaming, that's a favorite. So typically once we've kind of imported our flow and we've made a bunch of changes to it and we've set various things up for it, the nature of our test cases kind of depends on what we want to do. So if we just very quickly look at my model here, I have, not a super complicated model, but, it's not trivial either. And it's essentially, a mock-up model about somebody attempting to stream a song on their phone, vis-a-vis Spotify. So this setup here is basically deciding, okay, well, the phone I'm trying to stream on, is it Wi-Fi capable? If it's not, is it fast enough? If it is fast enough, I'll attempt to stream the song. Otherwise, am I connected to 4G, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And you essentially get to, three different kind of outputs here. The music plays, it displays the area that the stream is interrupted, or it displays the area that no connection is fast enough. And then eventually, there's a few more things that happen, and it gets to the end. So a test case in our world is a path through this. So the typical way we use the tool is we go into the Path Explorer, and we decide, okay, well, what do we actually want to cover? So when we're just talking about test cases, I could just go and ask for all possible paths through the diagram. That's the simplest way. And if I run this, I'm going to get 71 possible paths. Okay. Now, we'll talk a bit more about which paths I'm going to choose in a second. But for now, if we look at these paths, if we pick any path from the list, we can see where it went in terms of where it went in terms of the diagram, but also a step-based view, which we might then export to, our favorite test case management tool, whether it's ALM, Rally, Jira, or, some custom Excel export we want to do. That's all available. So if we look at the steps here for this particular test case, we can see various things. So we can see, okay, it went to start, the user attempted to stream a song, it wasn't Wi-Fi capable, it was connected to 4G, the 4G was fast enough, we attempted to stream the song, the stream was successful, the music played, signal pattern, end. And as well as those kind of steps to our test case, we've actually also set up some test data along the way. Now, that's probably a topic for another day, specifically how we set up test data. But if you want to ask it as a question, that's fine. But just from the point of view of test cases, every path can pick up multiple different, attribute references that it picks up based on all of the blocks it goes through. So a particular piece of test data is picked up because of the route I took through user attempts to stream song. Or 4G equals connected was picked up when I went through this decision in a particular way. Now, more on test data potentially later. So of these paths, the question then becomes, well, which ones do we want to use, right? And now, before we do any exporting, it's worth noting that these stored path types that you have set up here are two things that you guys might not know. The first thing is that these are totally editable. This is a totally editable list. If I want another entry on here which says Ben's test cases or Ben's favorite paths, I can do that very easily, and I'll show that later. But the other thing to bear in mind is that these are basically just buckets of stored paths. The names don't provide any additional meaning. They're just names of buckets, okay? So, for example, complexity cases, I'm only using it because it's empty, right? I would have used test cases otherwise, but there's already stuff in there. I don't want to mess with it. So I'm just going to put them into complexity cases. Now, you can make as many or as few as you like and name them whatever you want. So one of the main points of Agile Designer now is that I don't want to run 71 test cases, right? So what we do is we choose from one of the optimizations. Now, just to begin with, I'm going to choose the one that I typically use most of the time, which is all in out edges. Now, these different optimizations, and actually I'm just going to run all edges first. These different optimizations here, they correspond to different coverage targets. So if I measure the coverage of these 7 paths by hitting the $ button, you'll see that I'm actually I'm covering different things on the diagram. Now, the exact meaning of these can be ascertained any time by hitting the Coverage Explain button. So you can either hit the $ button inside Path Explorer or in the main window, and anytime you can hit Coverage Explained or Cost and Complexity Explained if that's what you want to know about. So if I go and look at the paths that I generate with all edges, and you notice that I didn't store those, so they've gone away. If I generate those again, if I measure their coverage, and if you guys want to know about coverage, I can totally talk about that, but I'll skip over it briefly for now. But essentially, coverage is different definitions of what it is on the diagram that it's worth covering. So you say to the tool, okay, I want to cover, across my test cases, I need at least one that covers every block, or I need at least one that covers every edge, or every edge pair across a block, or every edge pair across the diagram. There's about 4 or so measures of coverage, and you can look up their meanings inside the tool. But the point is then is that if I then generate based on a particular target, it's going to give me the minimum number of paths to get that coverage. Okay. Now, once I've stored these test cases, and there it just gave them a particular name, found a name for them in an older version, and I've just got these stored. Now, if I save the file, these will stay. So I can then go and export these to various places, be it Rally, ALM, Jira, version 1, etc. And then, as you can see, there's a current thing for Team Foundation Server, but it's a prototype and it's only on my kind of internal dev version. So that is in the works. I can also export them to various other places using the Excel exporter. So I can use some of the built-in templates, or I can use the general exporter, which basically allows you to specify an exact template inside Excel as to how you would like your test cases to be exported. And there's actually a really good DocOps page on that, which I'll link to in a minute, on exactly how that works. So essentially, we've got our test cases now. We can export them wherever we want. And I've just done my test cases based on all edges. Now, there are a couple of other options which are worth bearing in mind. For example, I could go ahead and run all possible paths, and then I could sort by, say, the test importance, which is worked out by the criticality of each block. So if I have any critical blocks in my path, which is something that I can just go and set inside, if I double-click on a block and go to Properties and say set this test importance to critical, just on this error block, if I go and generate, say, all possible paths now, I can go and order by the overall test importance of the path. Now that means that all of the paths which include my critical block are going to come up first. So I could say, okay, well, I want all edges, or I want all in-out edges, but I also want, say, the 4 most critical paths. So I'm going to go ahead, select those here, and hit Store Selected. And one of them wasn't stored because it was actually already included in the 7 that I'd already got. So I'm now added 3 additional ones, and I'm up to 10. And now I might say, okay, well, I also want, say, the 10 most probable paths. And it works in a similar way. And probability is another attribute that in the very latest versions you can set based on the output. So I can say if going down true happens 20% of the time or 50% of the time, whatever it might be. Okay. So another thing is in terms of generating test cases is you can also say, well, these 10 test cases, let's measure their coverage. Well, they're not quite at in-out edge 100%. Right? But say I've already run these 10 test cases. Instead of going ahead and generating a whole new set for all in out, which these 8 might not correspond, there might be none that match with that 10. I can say add to existing, and it's going to say just fix this coverage metric for these 10. So generate me just the new paths I need. So I can go ahead and just generate these 4 additional paths, which when added to the original 10, will actually fix that method of coverage. So if I'd already run those 10, running 4 new ones is better than running 8 new ones. Now, there are lots of other options regarding test cases. So if you've got loops, you need to check out the looping options, and there's a help button about that. If you've got any pins that you want to make sure that only generating paths going through there, you can turn those on. And there's further options here, and they're all explained under help. But 99% of the time, you don't need to worry about this unless you're using subflows. Okay? I think I kind of went over with that answer, so I'm going to stop for a second and regroup. Okay. I see. Okay. So can you guys still hear me, by the way?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So Tracy's most recent Tracy's most recent question is, can I add the missing info into Excel which exported from ARD and then reload the test case back to ARD? No. So we don't have a method of doing that, but I would argue that it's not necessary. And the reason I'll give you is this, is that if you noticed when I was generating test cases, I had quite a small diagram, and it was generating 71. And now that actually scales up quite significantly. So if I just open another example, it will kind of be more obvious the point I'm going to make. So if we go and find this flow here, okay, so this flow here, there's about 20 blocks, right? Now, if I go and generate, say, all possible paths for a flow like this, it's still going to do it. It's 10,000. The optimizer is pretty quick. But I don't want to be going and manually putting any data into any of these test cases. But you'll notice for any one on this path, any path in this diagram, I actually have every single piece of test data set. So how did I do that? The truth is that in ARD, the goal is to never set things per path. It's to set things at the block level and then have them inherited inside a path. So for example, if inside Excel I needed some kind of requirements matrix, there's a very cool way of doing that. So if we go inside properties, okay, and we go to requirement IDs, I can go and say, okay, well, I have a requirement ID, which is, rec1, just from my original user stories or something like that. And I'm going to give it a description, which is, I'm just going to say, bank loans have an amount, right? Something easy like this, okay? Or I might add another one which says, and you notice it increments it for you based on what you have up here, okay? And it will do that with numeric things as well. And it will do that automatically. So I can keep hitting add, and I've got rec 2, 3, 4, 5, and it works that out for me. So I'm just going to delete those 3. So I'll say, okay, well, another requirement was, interest rates are calculated daily, okay? So I've declared these 2 requirements in the properties for the entire flow. But the idea now is that I can go inside any particular block, say, set interest to be fixed, and I can go into requirement IDs. And when I say go into a block, by the way, I mean double-clicking on a block to open up its kind of attributes window. So if I go inside requirement IDs, I can then say here whether or not the block was assigned. So if I, just assign this one here and open up this block and assign this one here, the other one, then every single path that goes through that is going to pick up that assignment. And that's something that I can export out to Excel. We have lots and lots of fields in here, in terms of notes, output text, expected results, any kind of test data variables you want to set. You can even add custom fields if you like. To add custom fields, by the way, just go into the configuration general config. And if you go to block custom fields, I can say, okay, I'm going to call this field name missing data, right? And I'm going to give it a default value of 1. And I'm not going to, I can say, does this associate with any kind of automatic export? If I hit none, then that's okay, right? If I hit save now, save and close. Now, if I go inside a block, I can actually go to any custom fields, and I can set the value for missing data on any block that I like. So when I export to Excel, I can reference that field. So I can say for every single path, for every single step within that path, which is a block, I want you to list me out the missing data field. So for any kind of, and I really would encourage you guys to head over to DocOps and check out the custom Excel export page, because any kind of data that you need to be setting should, in theory, be set at the block level. Now, you can set additional data at the test case level inside ARD before you export if you insist. So if we take one of our stored paths here and open up the details view doc, we can add various other fields. We can put into the notes, into kind of there's a lot of places to write things which we can all reference inside Excel or any kind of other export. So you'll notice here, I've actually got about 7 different, I can't count, about 9 different custom fields, which are at the path level. So you can have custom fields at the path level or at the block level. And these have been picked up from where they've gone through. And I can, again, I've associated these with JIRA, but they could have, and I can't change this association here. I have to change it at the config level. But I can actually go and reference these during any of my relevant exports. Okay, so this won't come up inside Rally, but it will come up inside JIRA, and then I can optionally make it come up inside Excel with a custom Excel export. Okay. Let me, I'm going to go ahead and find that DocOps link, actually.
Hi, Ben. It's James here. Just joined the call.
Hey, James. We've been over a few interesting questions, actually. How you been doing?
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, good.
Do you have more? Do you have more precise information about the nature and when the TFS integration, if that's on the horizon or when it might be? I guessed at about 2 sprints out because I know they've got a working prototype, but you probably have a better idea of it than I do.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a prototype of this, which is kind of on internal use only. But in the next month, we're starting up a customer validation program. So if anyone's interested in signing up to that, shoot either myself, James Walker, or Ben, or Melanie an email about that, and we can keep you posted on that, and we'll be able to feature, the prototype of the TFS integration in that. But yeah, as Ben said, we're looking at about a 2-sprint cycle on that. So we're looking around early August time, I believe, the 10th of August, which will be version 2.2.
Great, cheers. I've just sent everyone that link to the exporting and importing, particularly exporting to Excel using templates is what I meant to say. Any more for any more? And by the way, James, feel free to chime in or take over if you have anything in particular you want to announce or show in the kind of space between questions.
Sure. Thanks.
All right, does anyone have any other questions? Just a reminder, to ask a verbal question, it's #6 on your telephone keypad to unmute yourself, and we also have the chat box set up in the bottom right-hand corner of the WebEx screen. We're also open to hearing any feedback on the communities, any documentation we have out there. Anything you guys want to talk about that's related to Agile Requirements Designer, we're here to answer your questions or take your feedback, anything along those lines. A question from Tracy. Thank you, Tracy. You're asking lots of questions today. We love that. What do you think ARD can help on our test job before ARD is integrated with TFS?
Could you give me a bit more information on what you mean by your test job?
She says, write test cases in TFS, but ARD is not ready to be integrated with TFS yet.
So I guess my point that I would make to this would be, if TFS can import in any kind of Excel-based way, then that's a gap you can bridge with the custom Excel export. Further, you know, again, ARD is a test case design tool. So if it turns out that, you know, the exact test cases that you need to design is for quite a complicated system, you know, typically manually designing them is A, quite a pain, and B, is not so accurate in terms of the coverage that you might get. So there's a quality issue. So what you could do is, even without any kind of hard integration, being able to actually design test cases, you know, the minimum number of test cases that will cover what you need to cover is quite an important ability. So, you know, even if that meant that you had to put them into TFS yourself, that would still be an advantage. Now, I would still try and bridge the gap with the Excel export, and again, the TFS thing is coming fairly soon. The other thing, you know, how it reacts to change. So when you have, say, 1,000 test cases, being able to, you know, if you make a change to your model, what does that mean for those 1,000 test cases? You know, which ones are invalid, which ones do you need to run again, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That can be very difficult to do manually. If you have 100 test cases, that could take you an entire day. So typically, the way we do it is we let the computer decide. So if I just very quickly share my screen, there's two things I want to show you. Whoops, that's the wrong thing. Right. So the first thing is, again, if we go back to song streaming real quick, and I'm only going to do it with like 8 test cases or so here, but the same process would be valid if it was 100 test cases. So if I go and say, all right, we have our 14 test cases, right? Now, what happens if we go and look at those 14 test cases? As we recall, they have 100% in-out edge coverage. Okay? Now, what happens if, you know, when we're not connected to 3G now, there's a change request that says, when you're not connected to 3G, you're now going to check if you're connected to 2G. And if you are, display an error. Okay? Can you guys, sorry, I think my speaker might have. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, you're still there, Ben. It jumped out, but I can hear you loud and clear now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, my USB connection went a bit dodgy. So
Okay.
If I go ahead and just add another decision to represent that, which we're just going to say, you know, it's 2G capable. Right? Just put a little question mark in as well. And I'm just going to, you know, rearrange my diagram a little bit to represent this. Now, your change might be much more complicated than this, but it typically is going to be a diagram change. So if we go ahead and say, okay, well, we're not capable, then it's just going to display an error like before, and when we are, it's going to, you know, wait for the buffer, right? So just move these a little bit, make it a bit neater. So with that in mind, but which of my 14 test cases have been changed now? So if I go to the Path Explorer and view the complexity cases we stored earlier, it has worked out for me instantly that one of my 14 has been impacted by that change. Now, that's useful in two instances because first, you know, I don't have to run through 14 test cases and work out if they've been impacted, or, you know, if this was 100 or 10,000, like I showed you earlier, the process would be identical. But also here, I'm going to delete this. So say I've run these 14 test cases. I'm going to don't worry, this doesn't delete the test case, but I'm going to delete the test case from consideration in our coverage metric. So if I delete this test case, okay, and we look at this 13, and we measure our coverage now, we've dropped to 90% in our edge coverage. Now, again, like before, I could go and say, oh, well, let's just go and run in our edges and work out the minimum path to do that. And so we could do it in 9. But you remember, I had test cases for the most likely and the most critical and things like that that I don't want to lose out on. Additionally, none of these 9 necessarily have to include any of those 13. So again, I'm going to run add to existing and work out the 2 paths that I need to fix my coverage after the change. So we've got our 15 test cases, and I only have to run these 2 new ones at the end of my sprint, post that change to kind of make up for it. So a change request has come in, and my reaction to it has taken a couple of minutes and a couple of test cases. Now, instead of having to spend all day going through 100 test cases or 200 test cases, and then, you know, just guess at which ones and maybe introduce an error there. Manual test case design is pretty prone to errors in terms of what kind of, and if we just measure this back up to 100%, is pretty prone to errors in terms of what kind of, you know, what kind of test cases you design, and not necessarily the best or the minimum to cover everything. And we don't typically see very high coverage measures when we look at manually designed test cases. So if now, for example, just to simulate this, something I do sometimes is I say, okay, let's just find another. Just going to delete this one test case. So if I go here and I say, okay, let's generate probabilistically, and I'm just going to have it actually generate me a random number of paths, okay? So I'm going to say, just go and give me a number of paths. I want you to generate me randomly, let's just say 1,000 paths, okay? If I randomly designed 1,000 test cases, without really thinking about it, and it's just based on the probabilities that we set earlier. So if I just hit compute now, and there's only 86 possible paths, so it's actually only come back with 86. But the point is that you don't need this many in order to actually complete you don't need this many to complete the coverage. You only need, as we saw earlier, something more along the lines of 9. So the advantages with ARD in your setup is mostly about test design and test maintenance. So again, obviously that would be far better when we directly connect to TFS, because, you know, inside TFS I can update any test cases that have changed, I can add the new ones, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No, I know I'm not sharing the screen. I've stopped doing things in ARD. Don't worry, Dan. But my point is that despite not necessarily right now being able to put it straight into TFS, the time you save is mostly, and the quality gain is mostly in the test generation and test maintenance when there's a change. Because if you've got 1,000 test cases and you receive a change, you know, within a couple of days at the end of the sprint, that's a nightmare. Or that actually might mean that you can't put that feature out because it can't be tested in time. Because identifying the minimum number of test cases is a challenge rather than the sheer number of test cases you have to execute. Now, again, I would look into, you know, what TFS is able to import in terms of Excel-based test cases, because, again, as a good backup to whenever there's something you want to export to, which we don't have yet directly, the custom Excel export usually will allow you to match any kind of importing format that you need. Okay.
Ben, I was just having a quick little look on the internet then while you were doing your thing. It looks like there is some kind of Excel framework we can, you know, provide a little temporary solution with there. So if I get some time this evening or tomorrow, I may have a look at that. So Tracy, just give us a little poke and give us a little email to chase us up on that, and we'll take a look.
Okay, great. Thanks for the questions, Tracy. And thanks for letting me know, Dan. I might not. Luckily, it didn't matter this time, but I do that a lot. Any more for any more? James, do you have anything that you want to show people that's new and upcoming that you've been working on? Something secret? Something top secret?
There's always lots of stuff, but I think for the moment we're keeping a few things under wraps, so I'm going to hold off on that front, I think.
Okay. Well, while we're waiting for another question, I'm just going to go over a couple things that I normally do in the tool to kind of make it a lot easier to use, because it can be a bit fiddly. So let's just open a new Agile Designer. I'm just going to call it something, okay? If there are any questions, feel free to interrupt me, and I'll answer that instead. So a couple of things, guys, with Agile Designer. It's quite an easy tool to use, but there are a couple of things you can do to make it a lot easier to use. The first one is to use a mouse wheel. I know that sounds bizarre to say on an office hour, but Control mouse wheel makes it a lot easier to kind of very quickly navigate a flow. So if I open, one like this, it's much easier for me to zoom around and move things about and so on. If I don't have to, constantly worry about being able to zoom in, I can space stuff out. It makes life a lot easier. The other thing which I like to do is if you go to File Settings, you can also change a lot of things here. Now, something which bothers me and bothers a lot of people is scroll on drag. So if I turn it on for a moment, you'll see if I drag an item now, it can often kind of go quite wildly off the screen. It's quite sensitive. So if that is something that actually is more frustrating for you than useful, see here it's quite a bit of a pain. I'd go to Settings and just disable that. I usually keep it disabled. If you want your Agile Designer to look cool like me, turn on Use Style Colors and restart Agile Designer. You also, if you're on a very recent version, I believe you can also customize the keyboard shortcuts, which is quite good as well. One other thing which is worth keeping in mind is you'll notice now I've got quite a large graph and I don't know where I am. So there's quite a lot, if you just right-click anywhere on the canvas, there's quite a lot of right-click options which, again, adjust kind of for ease of use. So the top one, I'd say, would be Fit to View. Now, that's going to basically draw the smallest possible box around your widest, all of your widest blocks. And that will kind of give you a recentering, if you like, of, where your actual flow is. You can also center the view, which does a similar thing, but without zooming you out. So if I was zoomed in right now and scroll over here and center view, it's centered me, but it hasn't actually scrolled me out to the appropriate kind of zoom. If you fit to view, it does. Also, hand scroll mode, if you right-click to toggle it, so I can right-click and turn it on or off, is quite useful for just be able to right-click hand scroll mode and just drag across the screen like this, rather than having to figure out anything more complicated than that. There's also the flow overview, which you can toggle here. If this is something that you're interested in, you can also actually put this inside your docs. It's quite fiddly to do, though. I'll do that later. But this is basically a kind of mini map of your flow that you can turn on or off. Just kind of turn it back off now. There's also a lot of select all options, which again is pretty useful if you're trying to just get hold of everything of a particular type. So if you just want to remove all of your connections or remove just all the decisions or something like that, you can select them all like this. There also, one of the things which happens a lot is if you, we just open a smaller flow now. If you, for example, have brought in lots and lots of flows, and lots and lots of blocks from some kind of external import from test cases, right? A lot of the time what happens is the step names inside things like ALM are frequently things like 1, right? Step 1 or stuff like that, which is not particularly useful. So I changed these two to 1 and 2. That isn't particularly useful when we're kind of in Agile Designer world, because any test case will just say, oh, it went through the 1 block, which isn't essentially very useful to us, right? Now, what's interesting is that usually when you bring these things in, they do have a useful description. So if the name isn't very indicative of what a block does, or any blocks do, you can actually go ahead and go display options and actually have it display on the canvas, not the entity names, but the entity descriptions. And now you'll see I have first name error, last name error, which is a lot more useful to me. So particularly if you have lots of blocks which are step 1, step 2, step 3, and there's 5 different step 3s, that's quite a useful approach. One more thing, there are some chat items, so you see. Do you have any user menu to show step-by-step on how to build from start to end and explain detailed function of each file? Assume you mean user manual. The manuals aren't amazing to do that. We don't really have a getting started guide. However, there are a ton of videos around this kind of thing. However, where they're located is not always totally obvious. The one on YouTube is not detailed enough. Yeah, that's that's arguable. There are a few different YouTube playlists. I don't know if you check them all out. James, can you grab me the links to all of the YouTube playlists?
Yeah, sure. I'll find
they're
that now.
usually pretty good. But if that's fair feedback, actually, that there isn't just a step-by-step of how you build from start to end, that's fair enough. And particularly, I know, for example, that there's tons of fields here which certainly haven't been explained in any videos. Now, the truth is that if you don't have a reason for a field, I wouldn't worry about it, is the very, very short and almost blasé answer. But it is true. Most of the fields are for particular things that you need them for. They serve a very particular purpose, which doesn't apply for all use cases and certainly isn't required to build a flow from start to end. In terms of building something from the start to the end, in terms of the logical step-by-step, you're right, there probably isn't an amazing video on, working out the logic of what needs to set up to what. So perhaps I'll make one of that. That's good feedback. In terms of, building out, and parsing your logic, there's only so far that a general video will go with that, but it will at least allow you to understand how you go from pure logic to a flow, and then you'll have to work out, from the knowledge you have to the pure logic. Now, when it comes to the meaningfulness of each field, that really does depend on the use case. There are trainings, there are online trainings you can take, but I would say that for the most part, if you worry about getting the structure of the model correct, anything you want to do after that regarding, test data or data that has to be in TFS or some other place is when you come to those questions. But I would try and nail down the logic of the flow first. And if we don't have an amazing video on that, I'll certainly make one.
Yeah, so I've just linked a little video there that Hugh made last week, which is, if it probably doesn't go into the level of detail you're looking at there, Tracy, but perhaps it will have some new stuff in there. This is quite up to date. So this was made on the 25th of July, so just over a week ago now. So you may find that one interesting. Also, we're working on some videos at the moment which kind of provide the detail that you're interested in. So we're looking at kind of splitting our videos into 3 kind of core areas, which revolve around more the use cases inside Agile Designer. So we're creating a video for, business analysts. We're creating a video for testers. We're creating a video aimed at automation experts as well. Okay. And one other thing, Ben, it may be worth showing is that there are some videos inside the tool, right? So if you go into, I think the constraint panel may be a good one. And
yes,
you should
good
be able,
point.
Yep. Okay.
So
you go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So if you open any particular panel, and I can't believe I forgot this, James. Good spot. Let me just close this chat. So if you open up a particular a particular, are you sure there's one in here, James? If you open up a particular panel, oftentimes if you hit the question mark button here on hover over it, it'll actually say, oh, there's a help video about this part of the tool. And you can go ahead, and if I click here, it's going to, open it up in YouTube for me, create an advanced constraint, which is, a pretty useful video just on how constraints work, essentially. So there's a bunch of those. And if you click inside, for example, there aren't any more in this area, but if I say for open up filters, for example, there's probably going to be a video about filters. Okay, so that might not be the most obvious thing. It certainly isn't advertised anywhere, that feature. But if you want to see a particular, see if there's a video about a particular kind of area of the tool that you have open at that moment, it's a pretty good place to start. And actually, most of the things I said about the Path Explorer, again, there's going to be a whole set of stuff on this. So if I go ahead and click here, there's another video I can go and watch. Okay, so do try this out. It's useful in quite a bunch of different windows. It's certainly worth checking if there's a video on a particular thing you want to do. And you'll notice, of course, that when I click this, actually, and I go to a video, it's actually a part of quite a long playlist of such things that you can kind of just, for example, the Properties tab, and you can go and look at that in particular if you want to know about the Properties tab. So there are a few things you can kind of go through. These are at quite a low level, just exactly how these things work, like the difference analyzer, for example, but they're certainly useful. One last thing that I'd mention is on the welcome page, there are actually some tutorial videos and feature videos as well. I can see that there might be a gap in the video market, so to say, regarding just, the very basic of, I've got some logic, how do I turn that into a flow? What are the processes I go through in my mind? So I'll certainly look into that. Cheers for the question.
And just so you all know, we're currently working on trying to syndicate all of the videos published for Agile Requirements Designer onto the community as well, so it's all in one spot for you guys. So expect to see some more of those being loaded to the community page.
Absolutely, and it's worth bearing in mind as well that development absolutely love making videos on new features which come out. So I expect we'll be putting these on the communities page soon as well.
Fantastic. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any last-minute questions? We'll probably have time for one more.
You were going to do a poll, Melanie.
I was, yeah. I'm going to grab the ball back from you so I can start that. So since this is the first office hours session that we've done with the phone line, we just wanted to get your feedback on how you felt about this format, whether you liked having the phone line or you prefer to do the standard office hours with just the WebEx chat. So let us know what you think. We want to keep doing sessions like this in the future because we want to make sure we're answering any questions you guys have and making it as easy as possible for you to get the answers you need. So we'll take your feedback, and based on that is how we will start scheduling them out for the future. Other than that, I will post the recording of today's session in the communities, and I will also post the chat transcript from the back and forth that was going on within the WebEx chat. With that, I will also post links to those YouTube videos we were talking about and anything else that we mentioned that we think you guys should have direct access to. If you have any questions that come up after going into the product and actually taking a look at some of the stuff we talked about today, the community is always open for you to ask any questions you have, or you can feel free to reach out to Ben, myself, or James personally, and we're happy to help you in any way we can. Other than that, thank you guys so much for joining today, and keep an eye on the community for our next session. And thanks, Ben and James.
No problem.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys.